Leaving the mainland behind was a little scary. Hogan Island definitely wasn't in sight, and we just paddled off towards the horizon, looking out for ships.
I know the flat earthers in America will not believe this, but the fact that you can't see Hogan Island from sea level 50 kilometres away is because the earth isn't flat. A reasonable approximation for kayaking distances is that S metres away the earth's surface will have dropped below the horizon by S squared on 2r, where r is the radius of the earth. Calculating this for S equals 50 kilometres, you should find that you get a value of 196 metres. Now, since the highest point on Hogan Island is 116 metres above sea level, it's still a good 80 metres below your horizon. Another way to look at this is to think, let's say we want H to be 60, which will leave the top 56 metres of Hogan Island exposed. We can rearrange the formula to calculate what distance away we should be able to see that top 56 metres, and that should come to 27,670, just shy of 28 kilometres. That 56 metres is still not going to be very easy to see. It's about equivalent to the height of a person a kilometre away. So a little bit of swell and so on, you're still not going to see the island.
So we paddled on for a long way before we first made out Hogan Island, probably when it was only around 10 to 15 kilometres away.
I'm not sure which gap we're going through yet.
Once we could clearly see Hogan Island, its lure was just too strong, and we both ended up paddling towards the gap just right of the twin islets. A northeast crosswind had picked up and the flood tide was also running, so we should instead have kept pointing upwind well to the left of the twin islets. The size of the deviation in our GPS track, which I'll show in a minute, was very surprising. We could sense the tide flowing as we paddled between Hogan and Long Islet. Then, just around the corner, was our evening's accommodation. My phone got 4G reception partway up the hill to the right, which is also where this photo was taken. We slept on the floor in the hut. Having heard lots of stories about the rats on Hogan Island, we made very sure to close the door properly every time we went in and out. There is apparently an old cattle trough fed by a spring somewhere nearby, but we didn't investigate. Before our trip, I wrote a spreadsheet to help us calculate the best routes for each of the major crossings, taking the tidal flows and wind forecast into account. The basic idea is very simple. The spreadsheet just adds together vectors for paddling, tidal flow and wind drift, calculated for a small time interval, and uses a combined vector to predict an updated position, from where it repeats the process. A company called TideTech has a great tidal model for Bass Strait. This is a sample covering Deal Island through to Tasmania. Unfortunately, I didn't save anything covering Refuge Cove to Hogan. My spreadsheet aimed to match TideTech values for the currents along each of our planned major crossings. It ended up a bit complicated, but obviously the tidal flow depends on both the time of day and on your position along the route. In practice, the spreadsheet was fairly straightforward to use. You can pause the video and read the annotations on this slide if you are interested, but basically the orange cells highlight all the input that is required. This is pretty much set up for Refuge Cove to Hogan, and our blue predicted path is not ending up where we want it to at present. This column, pretty straightforward, the route we want to paddle, the day we're paddling, and what time of day we want to start. If I change the start time, it affects the path. Selecting the day gives us this tidal data, so maximum flood tide and ebb tide are somewhere around 1.8 kilometres per hour. The wind prediction for the day, if you want to ignore wind completely, you can put in a drift factor of 0, but we found 0.05 to be a reasonable guess. People will argue with that, but that's what we used. So these three cells here are the most important ones. conservative paddle speed, 4.5 kilometres an hour, allowing for your hourly breaks for snacks and so on. So this is the main thing to fiddle with, and I allowed for a different paddle bearing for flood tide and ebb tide. Turns out that on this particular day, if we paddled, I think it's at about 107 for both flood tide and ebb tide, we would have got pretty close. 15 degrees magnetic declination, so 92 was actually the compass bearing we'd want to be on. And these are our waypoints for storing in the GPS. Predictions for where we would be on the hour at each hour. What we should have done, as it turns out, was actually paddle more with the ebb tide, say at 100 degrees. And that would allow us to paddle more with the flood tide in the afternoon. And also help with the wind, so we wouldn't be fighting into it as much. And these are predictions of obviously 300 metres, that's close enough, arriving at about 5:15 after 11 hours of paddling, and with a bit of assistance from the currents actually going slightly faster than our paddle speed. Now for the really interesting bit, which is comparing our GPS track with our planned route. If you look at our track in the morning, you wouldn't think that we were heading for Hogan Island at all, but we were in fact paddling at a bearing of around 107 degrees true. The huge kink in our track in the afternoon is when we sighted Hogan Island and started to paddle directly towards it. This increased our paddle distance by about 3 kilometres, but it's not quite as bad as it looks. By the time we had to make up our lost northing, the flood tide was getting close to slack water and we only had an easing headwind to contend with. This slide compares the spreadsheet predictions with the GPS data at each of the hourly waypoint breaks. I think it did pretty good, we just needed to use it better. We were both tired on reaching Hogan Island, but tomorrow was crunch day for the trip. The forecast was good only until mid-afternoon. If we didn't get to Erith or Deal Island, we would probably be stuck on Hogan for a long time. I must have been tired because I have no more photography of in or around the hut. After unloading and getting comms up the hill, I created a route for the next day while cooking tea, entered it into my GPS and copied it across to Andrew's. Andrew's diary says that we finally got to bed at 10 p.m. with the alarm set for 3:30.